Why the fear mongering though? Why the fear mongering?
What fear mongering?
Well, you're saying journalism is dead.
Well,
there's our question. There's
there
the
you
proof
go.
right there.
Yeah, there you
go.
go.
There's the proof right there.
Well, why is it fear mongering? You've labeled it something.
You just made a judgment.
You made a judgment.
You made a judgment.
No, we're asking.
It's already started, folks. It's already started.
Hi, I'm Lee Harding. I wanted to do a video today about how media and unions are leaning against the Conservatives and how it's been this way in Canada for quite a while. And this story came into more prominence last November when we saw that the union representing Canadian journalists declared itself the resistance to Andrew Scheer. Can the mainstream media be trusted when the union representing them actively declares its opposition to a party not even in power? Jerry Diaz, the national president for Unifor, a private trade union, recently posted on his Twitter the following photo, declaring his team as resistance to Andrew Scheer. We will stop Scheer's stupidity. Scheer is brilliant. There's nothing to stop here. Unifor National Executive Board started planning for the federal election today. The resistance. Welcome to Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare. Well, wonderful. Unions against one party. The Post went as far as to describe Unifor as Andrew's worst nightmare. While certainly entertaining, the Post opens up a serious can of worms as Unifor represents over 13,000 Canadian journalists. For years, many have argued that Canada's mainstream press maintain a center-left bias. This post only goes to further that sentiment in a dangerous way. It opens up more arguments that the Conservatives will never have a fair shake from the mainstream press, and opens up to the same terrible relationship that exists in the States between Republicans and media. I am a member of this union as a condition of my employment. In other words, I can't get out of this union. And I cannot stress enough how stupid an idea this is for a union that represents journalists. I am committed to reporting vigorously and comprehensively on all third-party political spending. If you know much about how things have worked in Canada and how they went in 2015, there was a lot of third-party spending, money from American foundations that went to Canadian environmental groups, which then organized as an anything but Harper, anything but conservative kind of vote. While putting journalists in an ethical gray zone, the Post also brings up the second problem. Why is Unifor actively campaigning against the Conservative Party when at this moment it is the Liberals who are in power? You would assume that the union would actively attempt to pressure the employer rather than the competition to the employer, but hey, what else could you expect from an organization that actively puts out videos exposing scabs online? Now, there are some examples in recent Canadian political history where the union involvement really seems to have changed the course of the election. In the election before last in Ontario, there was 2,600 members that were told, don't vote for the Progressive Conservatives. And it represented journalists at the Star, Toronto Sun, Globe and Mail, Metro, Hamilton Spectator, Waterloo Region Record, Ottawa Sun, a bunch of others. Well, we're not endorsing anyone, the local president said. Please consider not voting for him. Jason Kenney took to Twitter at the time to complain about it, so did Tony Clement, and even some of the journalists themselves. It says, I don't know a single journalist working at a Unifor shop, myself included, who would input on this, said the Globe's Josh Wingrove. And basically the union leader said, well, we can't do a plebiscite on everything we do. Yeah, well, there's a difference between asking for a vote in your entire membership and actually doing some consultation. And Kathleen Wynne won the election, and union involvement was a lot to do with it. Ontario unions behind 94% of third-party ad spending in the last 3 elections. Yeah, they thought they spent about $20 million. It was certainly more than 15 in the past 3 general elections. 94% of all third-party advertising. So what a third party is basically you're not running in the election, but you can have some advertising in it. And the advertising was always against the Progressive Conservative Party, or almost always. There's 2 Labour umbrella groups, Working Families and Protect Ontario, which have strong ties to other political parties. Working Families employs a communication firm that has also held major contracts with the Ontario Liberal Party, while veteran NDP strategist Brian Topp was a leader of Project Ontario during the most recent election. It's not hard to see where they're leaning. It's not that the PCs didn't recognize this. In 2009, they tried to get Elections Ontario to rule that working families was a Liberal front. In the 3 elections since 2007, when third-party advertisers first had to disclose their spending, Ontarians have seen $16.4 million worth of such advertising, $15.4 million of it financed by unions. Corporate spending, $641,000, and all the other advocacy groups put together, $409,000. Even the independent chief electoral officer in Ontario thought that that was pretty darn lax. Here's something that happened to make Unifor be on the Liberals' side, and that is that in the final time in the Harper government, the last thing pretty much that the Senate did was pass the Union Disclosure Act. And initially, at least the concept of it, had overwhelming support not only from the public but from union members, many of whom felt that they were not getting the information that they wanted from their union. These dues are coming out, they have no say in it, they don't know where the money goes, and the union leaders really did not want this kind of transparency and disclosure. So again, the Ontario Federation of Labour, they're totally against it, totally went against the Conservatives in the 2015 federal election, sponsored by Conservative MP Russ Hebert and backed strongly by the Prime Minister's office. It gained Senate approval Tuesday and requires unions to publicly disclose any spending of $5,000 or more and any salary of more than $100,000. So is that unreasonable? But no, the unions called it a big attack. It's punitive. Nobody else is expected to do this. The thing that makes unions unique is that they have forced dues as well. Yes, the bill covers all labor organizations, etc., etc. Hugh Segal thought that the passage of the bill could hurt the Conservatives in dozens of ridings, and maybe that's how it turned out, because minutes after the final vote, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau vowed to repeal the law if his party should form the next government. And that is indeed what happened. So when the Liberals took power, they said, oh, we're not going to have this union disclosure. Sure enough, when Trudeau comes to power, happy Solstice Day, there's an announcement that they're going to repeal the bill, which we knew they would. So now the unions love them because everything is shrouded in the darkness just like it was before. The president of Merit Canada said Canadians should be alarmed that their new government does not want any public scrutiny of union spending on political and social causes. The Liberals are not alarmed because it's going to go to them. 1 week after the union says they're going to support Justin Trudeau, the finance minister announced that the government was introducing $600 million in tax credits and incentives to help the media industry over the next 5 years. So in other words, the rest of this term and the next term if they get one. So, do you think money talks? Justin Trudeau thinks it's the job of the media to shower him with praise. And coincidentally, in an election year, he's forcing Canadian taxpayers to dole out $600 million in order to try and buy Trudeau the media's support as he goes to the polls. Some of the money is expected to go towards a new tax credit for media organizations to support the production of content. There are a number of ways that already happens. And already taxpayers are often upset about this when they find out about how that works. Another tax credit would be aimed at subscribers to digital news outlets. The plan would also allow nonprofit media outlets to apply for charitable status. We have seen, so now media is a charity. That's interesting. Certainly gives the impression of potentially affecting, not necessarily individual journalists, but the organizations, the companies, the employers that they work for, said Conservative MP Peter Kent, a retired journalist himself. When the media or media organizations, or in fact individual journalist jobs, are dependent on government subsidies, that is the antithesis of a free and independent press. Well, I'll say he gets it. And Michelle, she's beautiful. You know what? Journalists are the victim of the Trudeau sponsored content fund. That's what she calls it. They're all going to have to work extra hard to prove their objectivity in an era where everyone is a content creator. RIP free speech. Pierre Poilievre similarly said, so Justin Trudeau and the system he's setting up will determine whether your mortgage gets paid. This is a metaphor, of course. and you say that will have absolutely no impact on the nature of your coverage. Well, I think you can forgive us for being just a little skeptical about that claim. What Justin Trudeau is telling us is, here's $500 million. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Not all conservatives agreed. The ones that are getting the money, they thought it was fine. Oh, gosh. Okay, Pierre Poilievre, he's great in the House of Commons. Let's hear what he's got to say about this.
The government decided to create a $600 million slush fund in order to entice journalists to favor this government in the next election.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's insulting to think that journalists can be bought off.
Why is the Prime Minister trying to buy off the media?
Why is the Prime Minister trying to buy off the media?
The Conservatives think that journalists can be bought, and we don't. We think that their work is absolutely fundamental to our democracy.
Now an attempt to bribe the media with $600 million in an election year.
We're also not afraid of an independent media doing their job. We believe that the media plays an essential role in our democracy.
Right. Yes, it does play an essential role. And there have just been some somewhat essential incentives given to make sure that the coverage is not so bad for the Liberals. This footage from CBC is kind of interesting. You're going to see a little bit later where this journalist asks a question and Pierre Poilievre is like, there we go, that's what we're talking about.
On November 14th, Jerry Diaz of Unifor, which represents thousands of journalists, announced his union's formal campaign against the Conservative Party of Canada, stating that he was the, quote, resistance against Andrew Scheer and Conservatives in Canada. On the same day, he called the $50 million mainstream media bailout package that Justin Trudeau announced in his 2018 deficit budget nickels and dimes. Just 2 days later, on November 16th, media reported that an even larger mainstream media bailout will be included in the fall economic statement. And yesterday, on November 21st, Justin Trudeau announced a $600 million subsidization initiative for media, which would be doled out by so-called trusted sources, that is, journalists selected by the Trudeau government, according to quality standards set by these Trudeau journalists. Today, the finance minister said that it was insulting to suggest that media could be bought off. Our party asked him if he felt the same way about Jerry Diaz. It's rich that the Prime Minister spent time in an international speech last week fear-mongering about freedom of the press, then came back to Canada and announced a Liberal-sponsored content fund. In an era where many traditional media outlets have struggled to transition to new digital platforms, where there are many more opinion pieces as opposed to true investigative journalistic pieces, Canadians have to ask if freedom of the press can be facilitated by a government-controlled fund, or if it's their responsibility to bail out journalists and media that have failed to utilize new content platforms. In the end, both journalists and Canadians have the potential to be victimized by this fund. Canadians risk a reduced free press and having their tax dollars spent on controlled media instead of on other vital initiatives. Journalists who accept these funds may have to work extra hard to prove their objectivity. Jerry Diaz said that he was resistance, and I'm here to say that he should resist this.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Justin Trudeau thinks the job of the media is to shower him with praise. And coincidentally, in the election year, he's forcing Canadian taxpayers to dole out $600 million in order to try and buy Trudeau the media's support as he goes to the polls. It's interesting that this announcement comes exactly 1 week after Unifor, one of the largest media unions, said it was going to dedicate the entire year to helping Justin Trudeau get reelected. A week later, of course, Justin Trudeau says, well, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And he provides this $500 million fund that will assist those journalists that meet Justin Trudeau's standard and that meet the eligibility requirements set out by a Trudeau-sanctioned panel.
You know, I'm looking at you, Glenn. I mean, would you feel comfortable with this? I mean, do you think that people would question objectivity in that point in time? I actually would. I think a lot of Canadians would too. Honestly, the only voices that have been heard in this, at Heritage Committee, committee after committee, is people that have something to gain. A lot of the mainstream media outlets are not profitable, they're not surviving, and is it the role of taxpayers to bail them out? At this point in time and under this circumstance, when so many Canadians are struggling to make ends meet, we're seeing higher taxes, I would argue the answer is no.
Why the fear-mongering, though? Why the fear-mongering?
What fear-mongering?
Well, you're saying journalism is dead.
Well,
there's our question. There's
there
the
you
proof
go.
right there.
Yeah, there you go.
There's the proof right there.
Well, why is it fear-mongering? You've labeled it something.
You just made a judgment.
You made a judgment.
You made a judgment.
No, we're asking.
It's already started, folks. It's already started.